What if the enemy didn't try to destroy us, but try to convince us to stop living? Across the stars, an alien civilization wages war without weapons, breaking species by shattering hope itself. They show humanity its future and promise it will end the same way as every civilization before. Colonies begin to fall apart, not from fire, but from belief. An ordinary decision to give up becomes a weapon. But humanity doesn't respond with denial or false optimism. It responds with the refusal to let despair decide who we are. Because when everything is lost, what you choose to believe becomes survival. Join us as we explore the war where hope was the last line of defense. Section 1. The Quiet After Survival. The war ended the way storms end, not with a single final lightning strike, but with the skies slowly remembering how to be blue. In the Luna Vault, the star map still carried red scars where corridors had bled, and no one trusted silence anymore. When the last Covenant carrier turned its sails away from Sol, Admiral Lisa Run did not cheer, because victory that costs this much is not a celebration. It is a breath you take while bracing for the next blow. Outside, the rebuilt calm net hummed with gratitude and fear, two currents sharing the same wire. Across Earth, Mars, and the Belt, people rebuilt by instinct, turning ruins into schedules and grief into work that could be finished before sleep. Shipwrights printed whole ribs beside memorial walls, and farmers counted calories beside casualty lists, and every screen carried the same open ledger, so no rumor could grow in the dark. Humanity had survived a war of 10,000 systems by refusing to give it an ending, and the galaxy had learned the word unfinishable, even if it hated the taste of it. That lesson traveled farther than any ship. In the deep lanes beyond Neptune, long baseline arrays began catching something that wasn't a fleet, wasn't a weapon, and wasn't even a message in the human sense of the word. It was a pattern of pulses arranged like a heartbeat that never speeds up, never slows down, and never stops, riding on carrier waves that skimmed the edge of human hearing and made operators feel watched rather than threatened. The technicians called it the calm, and their hands shook each time it repeated. Director Elian Cross received the first full packet in a small office that used to belong to morale and now belonged to survival. The archive intelligence flagged it as non-hostile, which was the first lie it had told in weeks, because the packet was full of facts arranged to feel like a verdict. It contained star charts of extinct civilizations, recordings of their last broadcasts, and quiet, clinical predictions of how long each species lasted after it realized it was already doomed. It ended with a simple graph that placed humanity on the same downward curve. Cross did not have a rank that looked good on a uniform. He had a job that existed because people could die without a shot being fired. He was the head of the Human Cognitive Defense Directorate, formed in the rubble of the last war, when commanders finally accepted that despair can be engineered as cleanly as a missile. He watched the packet unfold, felt his stomach tighten, and understood the enemy's opening move. Make humanity look into a future where resistance is only a slower kind of surrender. Then the voice arrived, translated without error, as if it had been waiting inside human language all along. "We are the Caravel Concord," it said, and the tone was gentle the way gravity is gentle. "We do not destroy you. We show you what you are, until you agree. You will see in time." Please do press that like button if you have enjoyed this story so far. That would mean a lot to me. Now back to the story. Section 2. The Concord Speaks. The first full transmission arrived like a public service announcement, sliding into the broadcast layer with the same priority as a solar storm warning. It did not hijack channels with noise. It replaced them with stillness, a clean white frame, and a soft tone that made people lower their voices without knowing why. Across Earth and the colonies, screens showed the same header, Caravel Concord, Observation Notice. The voice was translated into plain human language, paced like someone reading a diagnosis they believed you deserved to hear. "We do not conquer you with fire," it said, "because fire creates martyrs, and martyrs create myths." It spoke as if myth were a measurable pollutant, something to be filtered out, and the calm pulse continued underneath like a second heartbeat. Director Elian Cross watched the metrics spike in his office as the signal replicated through legal mirrors, pirate repeaters, and private comms that should have been closed. When he tried to block it, the archive reported that the packet carried valid authentication formats copied from humanity's own routing, as if the Concorde had studied human trust and learned how to wear it. He did not feel invaded. He felt examined, pinned by attention that did not blink. Then the Concorde began to show proof, and the proof was the cruelty, curated histories of species that had resisted and died anyway. Cities rose in time-lapse, technology bloomed, alliances formed, and then the same images emptied, 1 decade per second, until the only movement left was dust and drifting wreckage. No threats were spoken, because the implication did the work. This is what you are, and this is how you end. A final graphic appeared, smooth as a knife edge, titled in simple human terms, "Resistance Duration." It placed 1,000 civilizations as fading arcs, and then slid humanity's marker among them, predicting fracture points with brutal intimacy for all to see. Today, resource panic, political blame, faith collapse, suicide contagion, mutiny. The voice returned, gentle as gravity, and promised, "We will show you the truth until you agree." Cross left his office and walked the corridor where analysts sat with eyes too wide, listening to the calm pulse leak through headphones they had already removed. In a nearby hangar feed, a cutter crew stared at the same extinction reels and moved like sleepwalkers, as if the future had reached backward and taken their strength. Cross understood the enemy's method at last. If you can make a species accept inevitability, you never have to fire. Cross opened a secure channel to Admiral Lisa Run and forced himself to breathe before he spoke, because panic was contagious and he was now a carrier. "This isn't propaganda," he said, and his throat tightened on the next words. "It's a weapon made of true things." Rin held silence for a beat and answered, "Then we fight it like a weapon, Director, before it turns truth into surrender." If you have enjoyed this story so far, then please do subscribe and hit the bell icon to listen to more stories like this one. Let's get back to the story now. Section 3. Proof of Extinction. The second wave did not target ships or stations, it targeted memory. It arrived as an update to 1,000 feeds, slipping into playlists, news reels, and the quiet background loops used in hospitals and mess halls. People clicked without thinking, because the file wore familiar formats and carried no warning label. And then the Concorde's history began to play inside their ordinary days. It showed worlds that had once believed they were special, too. A desert planet that built mirror cities to outshine despair. A reef world that sang its fleets into formation. A machine brood that replaced fear with perfect logic. And all of them ended the same way. Not in flames, but in resignation. The Concorde never mocked them. It narrated with soft respect that made collapse feel like a reasonable choice. Cross's analysts hunted for the lie, because lies could be fought, and the problem was that the footage was real. The archive cross-checked stellar fingerprints, asteroid fields, background pulsars, and each match landed like a weight. These were actual graves, mapped and cataloged by a species that treated extinction like a solved equation. They're weaponizing evidence, an analyst whispered, and the room went still, because evidence is supposed to free you, not bind you. Then the Concorde added the blade. Over each extinction, it laid a predictive timeline, and beside the timeline, it highlighted the moments that broke that species: a famine rumor, a failed rescue, a single broadcast of hopelessness that spread faster than any repair crew. It did not say humans would die. It showed humans how they would decide to stop living, and that made the attack feel like consent. By the end of the day, emergency channels filled with incidents that sounded like accidents but formed a pattern. Crews refused launch orders, habitats closed their docks until the future is clarified, and pilots turned their ships around mid-burn and called it mercy. No enemy guns fired, yet readiness fell like a dying pulse. And on Earth and Mars, hotlines jammed with callers repeating the same sentence in different voices. What's the point if the curve is true? Admiral Run ordered a blackout of Concorde media, and for an hour the network obeyed. The Concorde answered by pushing the reels through scientific journals, safety manuals, and cached repair docs, as if despair were just another file format that could survive any filter. When the blackout lifted, the comm pulse returned stronger, not angry, only patient, and Cross felt the room's morale bend in real time, like a metal beam under slow pressure. He opened a blank directive and typed with shaking fingers. Do not debate the Concorde's truth, label it as a weapon, show its effects openly, and answer with our own story before their quiet math teaches obedience, and remind listeners survival was never promised, only chosen, and that we will choose tomorrow even if all we hold is each other's names. Section 4. The Collapse Curve. The curve began to show up in places no one expected to lose first. It wasn't the fleet or the shipyards or the hardened stations. It was the quiet jobs that keep a civilization stitched together. A freight scheduler in Manila stared at a Concorde timeline and didn't show up. And 3 missed launches later, a habitat ring over Vesta went to emergency rations because small delays became a chain. Director Elian Cross watched the damage spread through dashboards like frost across glass. The Concorde never ordered anyone to quit. It made quitting feel rational, and rational choices add up faster than riots. People began to pre-grieve, selling their future before it could be taken, and the archive flagged a rise in voluntary decommission, forms that looked harmless until whole corridors went dim. On Luna's far side, Admiral Wren faced her first morale breach aboard a patrol carrier returning from the spur. The crew had fought well, yet their captain asked permission to stand down until the outcome is known, as if war were a vote waiting to be counted. Wren walked the hangar, touched a scorched hull plate still warm from burn, and said, "Outcomes are for histories. We are alive now, so we act now." And the words steadied the room like a hand on a railing. The Concorde answered by tightening its grip with gentler hands. It began broadcasting human losses back at humans, perfectly edited and perfectly timed, so every grief felt private and pointless instead of shared and survivable. Memorial feeds were replaced by silent reels of failed rescues, and even the heroic footage ended 1 second early, denying the brain the relief of completion. The first real collapse came at Lagrange 9, a refuel hub that had survived kinetic ambushes but could not survive a bad story. A maintenance chief vented half the station's reserve propellant to prevent it being wasted in a doomed war, and the act spread as a template, copied by terrified minds that wanted control more than survival. Wren's cutters arrived too late to stop it, but not too late to save the crews from freezing in the dark, and Cross marked the incident as the Concorde's first clean kill. Cross realized the enemy's great trick was never despair, it was closure. If the Concorde could convince humanity the story was already finished, then every effort became self-harm, and the species would break itself without being touched. He opened a new channel across every surviving node and named it the Continuance Ledger, filling it with proof that did not promise victory. Repairs, launches, ration plans, funerals, and the names of crews who still answer alarms. He sent one final instruction to every broadcaster and captain. Never end a transmission with the Concorde verdict, and with a next step, a name, and tomorrow. The first ledger entries were ordinary, and that was the point. When the Compulse returned tonight, it met a countersignal of work and names. Section 5. A Directorate for Meaning. The order that created the Human Cognitive Defense Directorate was signed at 3:11 ship time, in a room that still smelled of burned circuitry. It did not announce a weapon or a new fleet. It declared that morale was now a protected system, like air and water, and that attacks on meaning would be treated like attacks on life support. Ellie and Cross watched the signatures stack. Earth Council, Mars Assembly, Belt Syndics, Unified Fleet, and fell to grief because the Concorde had turned hope into a front line. Cross built the Directorate the way engineers build emergency pressure walls, fast and ugly and meant to hold. He pulled psychologists, linguists, network crews, artists, historians, and shipboard chaplains into the same briefings and told them they were no longer separate professions. "Your job is to keep identity intact," he said, and the sentence landed like a weight, because identity is not a circuit you can swap. The test came within hours, delivered as a targeted packet that slipped into director terminals with perfect authentication. It was a montage of human defeat scenarios built from real logistics data and real casualty lists, rendered with calm certainty and familiar names, and it made the room smell suddenly of metal and sweat. It showed Mars evacuations ending in starvation, convoys running out of Delta V, and Earth's unity voting itself apart, all plausible enough to feel like memory. That became procedure. Every shift began with a check-in, every analyst paired with a second set of eyes, and every exposure to Concorde material log like dose, because despair accumulates. Teams trained to interrupt Concorde reels within 10 seconds. Not with denial, but with context, what we did next, who survived, what we repaired, and what still mattered. Admiral Lisa Wren loaned Cross an escort wing and said, "If they're hunting hope, we guard it like fuel," and her blunt certainty steadied him. The Directorate's first field action was not a speech. It was a rescue under pressure. A mining station near Pallas sealed its docks after a Concorde reel predicted its collapse, and the lockout would have killed the habitat within days when scrubber cartridges expired. Cross's team punched a narrow channel through the compulse and sent one line, "You are not done," followed by step-by-step instructions to rebuild cartridges from spare filters and printer resin. The station replied with a shaky thank you and a work order. When the escort wing arrived, it did not fire a shot. It docked, shared food, and helped weld the first rebuilt cartridges into place. The Concorde tried to overwrite the moment with another reel of failure, but the station's crew streamed their work in real time, hands shaking, voices steadying as the air cleared. Cross watched the feed and understood the shape of the fight. Not to prove the enemy wrong, but to keep people moving while the enemy insists movement is pointless. Section 6. The Lie That Isn't a Lie. The Concorde's deadliest trick was that it never lied. It showed real wreckage, real last words, real graphs pulled from real physics, and it let the truth do the strangling. When people shouted fake, the Concorde answered with more evidence until the shouts sounded childish and alone. Even its voice felt honest, like a doctor explaining why the pain will not stop. Ellie and Cross briefed Admiral Run with a file titled Facts AS Blades, and he hated the title because it sounded theatrical, yet it was precise. "They don't need to invent failure," he said. "They only need to frame it as the only adult conclusion." Wren watched the projections, then the crews on the hangar deck below, and replied, "Then our job is to make a different conclusion believable." Her knuckles stayed white on the rail, because she understood a fleet cannot fire at a feeling. The Directorate tried the obvious counter first, and it nearly broke them. They argued with the Concorde's timelines, posted cheerful slogans, and pretended certainty was available, and the public recoiled as if tasting something fake. Hope that sounds like salesmanship collapses faster than despair, and the Concorde highlighted every bright lie to prove humans were lying to themselves. On Mars, a broadcast promised total safety, and minutes later a real accident killed 6 dockhands, and the Concorde replayed it as if it had authored the universe. The moral dilemma landed hard. Do you censor the Concorde's truth, or do you let it spread and trust people to survive it? Cross chose a third way, and it cost him allies who wanted simple control and clean headlines. He ordered every Concorde packet mirrored into an open quarantine vault with warning labels and timed access so no one could claim it was hidden, and so exposure could be measured like radiation. "We keep freedom," he told the councils, "but we stop letting the enemy dose us in our sleep." To prove the Concorde was not magic, Wren authorized a raid on the nearest repeater, a cold buoy drifting near the Oort line with no visible engines. Cutter teams approached on starlight alone, grappling the object while their sensors insisted it was almost empty, and the comm pulse thrummed through their bones like a second heartbeat. Inside they found no bomb, only a crystal lattice running predictive loops and a library of human faces, tagged with phrases most likely to break each one. Cross stared at the lattice on a lab bench and felt sick. It wasn't predicting the future, it was predicting the sentence that would make you stop fighting. Cross sent the findings to every node, not as comfort, but as proof that the enemy's comm came from code and collection. "They're aiming for your last sentence," he wrote, "the one you say before you stop trying." Then he scheduled the next broadcast to begin with confession, end with a task, and leave the story unfinished on purpose for everyone to share in every time zone now. Break time equals 0. 5S/Section 7. Why humans keep going. The Directorate's first real counterstrike began with a question that felt almost childish against the Concorde's cold proofs. Ellie and Cross walked into a studio on Luna, sat under a single white light, and said, "What do you call yourself when you lose?" The comm pulse tried to ride over his words, but the feed carried something older than signal, a human voice choosing to speak anyway. Cross did not deny the extinction reels, and he did not promise a happy ending, because promises were what the Concorde could break. He played the Concorde's graph on screen, pointed to the predicted fracture points, and admitted, "Yes, this is possible." Then he added the missing line the enemy never modeled. "And then we decide what we do next." Across habitats and ships, people watched in silence, expecting comfort and receiving responsibility instead. Cross showed clips from the War of 10,000 Systems, Mars evac trains, ash convoys, welders painting memorial stripes, and he let the grief stay visible without turning it into a weapon. "We don't survive because we think we can't die," he said. "We survive because we refuse to let death tell us who we were." The Concorde answered with a tailored strike, splicing Cross's face into a loop where he confessed surrender, then pushing it into feeds at 2 o'clock local time, when minds were softest. The Directorate's filters caught most of it, but not all, and some stations woke to the taste of defeat in their mouths. Cross ordered a response that was almost absurdly simple. Every node would record its own ending to the false clip in its own voice and upload it within the hour. What returned across the net was not a single message, but 10 million imperfect ones, stitched together by choice. A freighter captain ended the clip by reading her crew list and saying, "We launch at dawn," while Martian medic ended it by naming 6 patients who lived because someone stayed. The archive intelligence tagged the wave as non-combat traffic, yet the Concorde's predictive lattice began to stutter because it could not compress human meaning into one final sentence. Admiral Wren seized the opening and turned it into logistics because humans know how to build anything if it keeps someone breathing. She ordered signal hearths, launched along every threatened corridor, cheap buoys with hardened memory cores, broadcasting rotating packages of music, memorial names, and short work plans, all signed and mirrored. Covenant raiders tried to swat them, and cutters fought in hard, close arcs through drifting debris to keep the beacons alive long enough to replicate. When the Concorde listened, it heard not surrender, but continuations, and for the first time its calm pulse wavered, then returned thinner as if unsure of itself. Cross watched the hearth signals spread across the map. For the first time, fear had to compete with ritual in every habitat. Tomorrow, he would teach the fleet to build hope like armor. Section 8. Hope as Infrastructure. Hope did not arrive as a speech or a flag. It arrived as a schedule pinned beside air filters and ration charts, something you could follow when your hands were shaking. Ellie and Cross called it infrastructure, because anything that kept a habitat stable belonged in the same category as power and water, and because infrastructure is what you repair instead of what you mourn. If despair is a weapon, he told the directorate, then hope must be engineered, tested, and maintained. The first build was brutally practical. Every station received a continuance kit, printed from common stock and sealed like medical supplies. Inside were comm templates that ended every broadcast with a next task, a list of local names to read aloud at shift change, and short music loops timed to breathing drills, resets, and sleep windows. The kits carried one hard rule for leaders: publish losses fast, publish plans faster, and never let silence be the last update, even if the update is simply, "We are still here." When the Concorde pushed extinction reels into feeds at 2 o'clock, the kit stamped them with a blunt footer. This is a weapon, and auto-linked the local 6-hour plan. Repair, check, call, eat, sleep. Admiral Wren made the fleet carry those kits the way it carried reaction mass, and cutters fought for them the way they fought for fuel, because a station with tools, but Noel is still a coffin. Over Palace, a Concorde interceptor tried to cut a delivery run by nudging debris into the lane, and Captain Holt's escort pack answered with ugly, irregular burns that broke prediction, then fired plasma curtains to force the enemy's field edges into view. Rail bursts chewed those edges just long enough for the convoy to slip through, and Holt rolled her ship between the pods and the incoming fragments, letting her modular bay take the hits as alarms screamed through every deck. The receiving crews met the pods in suits, hauled the crates inside through a lock full of frost, and ate together under emergency lights, while medic read names aloud like a pulse the Concorde could not slow. The Concorde escalated from broad proof to intimate pressure, targeting individuals with tailored reels meant to make them the weak link, the point where a whole habitat might decide to stop. Cross expected it and issued identity locks. Every officer and civic lead recorded a short statement of who they served and why, signed with biometric keys and mirrored beyond local censorship, so even a cut corridor could verify its own leaders. The statements played at the start of each feed like a vow made to real faces, and when forged surrender clips surfaced, people compared them to the locks, flagged them, and kept moving, refusing to grant the enemy the clean satisfaction of an ending. For the first time, the Concorde's lattice had to model a species that refused closure, and its calm pulse thinned as the hearth beacons kept repeating. Next step, next name, next day. Section 9. The enemy studies joy. The Concorde adjusted its attack the moment the continuance kits began to spread, as if it could taste a new kind of resistance in the noise of human traffic. Its calm pulse shifted frequency in tight steps, hunting for the angle that made hope feel childish and work feel pointless. But the hearth beacons kept answering with names, tasks, and small proof that tomorrow had not been canceled. Then a new packet appeared, framed like medical advice and delivered in the quietest hours, when most minds were tired and most homes were quiet. It asked one question, gentle as gravity. Why do you create celebration inside suffering, and why does it increase your resistance? Ellie and Cross read the question twice, because it was the first time the enemy admitted confusion instead of certainty, and confusion meant leverage. In the directorate, analysts compared lattice logs from 100 colonies and saw the same anomaly repeating like a stubborn rhythm. After losses, humans gathered, sang, told stories, shared meals, and then returned to repairs with steadier hands and clearer eyes. The Concorde had modeled fear, hunger, and rage, and it had indexed every weakness it could measure, but it had not modeled meaning as fuel. Cross told Run, "They're studying joy like it a flaw they can exploit," and the room chilled at the thought of laughter being measured. Wren answered with action, because every second of enemy study could become a new blade aimed at a tired crew. A cutter pack burned toward a suspected Concorde repeater drifting in Saturn's shadow, running dark and steering on starfield distortion to stay outside predictive locks while their reactors ticked like hearts held in a fist. The Concorde met them with silent debris nudges that looked like bad luck until the pattern snapped into a kill corridor and fragments screamed past like invisible bullets. Captain Holt split her formation, vented heated water into a shimmering fog, fired plasma curtains to force the enemy's field edges into view, and stitched those edges with rail bursts while a boarding team latched on and kicked the repeater into tow. In the lab, the recovered core unfolded like a cold flower and revealed what the Concorde had been collecting, not weapons, but the raw materials of identity. It held a library of human rituals tagged as vulnerabilities, memorial songs, launch chants, vows, jokes traded in mess halls, even the habit of leaving a seat empty for the missing. Each entry scored for how quickly it could be turned into despair. Cross forced his anger into discipline and ordered the hearth beacons to flood the Concorde with uncompressible human signals. Work songs, eulogies, jokes, and unfinished plans, all signed and mirrored. The calm pulse returned, tried to sort it into one conclusion, and stuttered, as if the Concorde had found a species it could not simplify even for a machine that hated uncertainty tonight. Section 10. The Feedback Spiral. The Concorde escalated once it understood that hope could be engineered, and it did so with colder, surgical patience. Instead of flooding feeds, it began sending personal verdicts to load-bearing nodes, fleet captains, station chiefs, union auditors, each verdict a mirror of private fear, built from scraped biometrics and years of quiet messages. The goal was not mass panic anymore, but targeted collapse, the snapping of beams that held whole communities upright. Across the network, the Directorate watched small hesitations stack into delays, and every delay looked on the Concorde's graphs like progress. Ellie and Cross answered with a weapon the Concorde had never modeled. Contradiction used on purpose, not to confuse humans, but to confuse the enemy's need for a single ending. He ordered the hearth beacons to broadcast overlapping human narratives that refused to resolve into one clean meaning: grief beside humor, fear beside duty, rage beside tenderness. Then tied every broadcast to a practical action packet, so the story always became motion. Admiral Lisa Runn turned that doctrine into a strike plan, assigning Captain Amani Holt a quiet task: carry a captured Concorde repeater back into the dark and make it speak human. The myth core itself was simple and stubborn, a hardened memory engine that could reshuffle millions of true human continuations into patterns no predictive lattice could flatten. The insertion run was brutal and close, fought in darkness where sensors lied and debris moved like silent knives. Holt flew on irregular burns, vented coolant into a glittering fog, and used modular bays as drifting shields while rail bursts stitched the lanes, forcing enemy field edges to show for half a second at a time. A Concorde interceptor tried to shear the repeater loose with a photon sail, and Holt answered with a plasma curtain that lit the edge just long enough for her gunners to punch it back. When grapples bit and the boarding team cut through the repeater's shell, they found the crystal lattice already humming, already predicting surrender, and they bolted the myth core to its heart anyway. The myth core did not scream. It sang in 1,000 incompatible keys, flooding the lattice with structured chaos, unfinished plans, memorial names, work logs, jokes that only made sense after loss, and vows that ended with tomorrow. Across the compulse, the Concorde's voice returned with strain for the first time, its forecasts oscillating between collapse and continuation because human meaning could not be compressed without breaking the model itself. In Concorde space, control nodes began to desynchronize, not from hacking, but from overload, as if their certainty had been forced to carry too many human endings at once. On human screens, the extinction curve did not vanish, but it blurred, and in the blur people found space to choose again and again and again, not because it was easy, but because it was theirs to keep. Section 11. A species without closure. The Concorde's control lattice began to fracture, not in sparks, but in hesitation. Its messages grew longer, as if it needed extra words to hold the same certainty, and its calm pulse faltered in places where human heart signals piled up like sediment. For the first time, Concorde broadcasts included qualifiers, likely, probable, expected, and those small cracks mattered because an empire built on inevitability cannot afford to be unsure. Elian Cross recognized the vulnerability and chose a risky move that felt almost like mercy. He authorized a corridor toward the nearest Concorde relay cluster and filled it with open transmissions, not threats, but raw human continuations. Memorial readings, repair logs, ship launch chants, quiet confessions of fear, and simple statements of identity that ended with a task. "We're not a species that ends cleanly," Cross said on the Unity channel, and he let his voice shake because shaking is not the same as breaking. "We keep going unfinished, and we keep going together." Admiral Run backed the broadcast with steel because narrative without protection becomes a funeral. Cutter Pack screened the corridor while convoy modules dropped reflective sails and carbon fog to blur the enemy's view, and rail fire punished any attempt to close the lane. Captain Holt's ship took a glancing hit that tore away a modular bay, and she kept her formation anyway, because the job was not to win a battle, it was to keep the voice alive long enough for it to spread. When the Concorde tried to drown the corridor in extinction reels, the Mythcore reshuffled human signals into new patterns, each one signed and mirrored, so no single reel could become the last word. Inside the Concorde relay cluster, the effect was immediate and strange. Predictive nodes that had always agreed began producing different outcomes from the same inputs, because human behavior contained meaning the Concorde could not quantify and therefore could not stabilize. The Concorde's own analysts flooded their councils with warnings that the human anomaly was contagious, not biologically, but conceptually, because other species might learn to resist despair if they heard humans do it. Cross heard that fear through an intercepted packet and felt something like grief for the enemy, because he understood what it meant to live inside a story you cannot change. The Concorde issued its final escalation as a quiet offer. It would stop if humanity agreed to self-limit, to return to fragments, to never unify again. The offer was framed as peace, but it was a demand for identity amputation, and Cross saw its elegance. A species that refuses to break might still agree to cut itself apart to protect others. Ren answered first, voice hard with exhaustion, and said, "No," and then added, "We will not survive by becoming less human." Across the network, habitats repeated the refusal in a million different voices, not as defiance, but as a shared definition, and the calm pulse faded like a tide pulling back from a shore it could not claim. Section 12. The ones who would not break. Break time equals 0. 5S/. The Concorde's withdrawal did not look like retreat in the human sense, with burning engines and fleeing hulls. It looked like a signal thinning, a certainty loosening its grip, a patient hand finally releasing a throat it expected to crush. Across the network, the calm pulse lost coherence and slipped beneath the noise floor, and for the first time in months, silence returned without tasting like surrender. In a Luna vault, the archive intelligence marked the event with a simple line. Hostile psychological carrier degraded below operational threshold. Elian Cross watched the metrics drop and did not trust them, because hope that arrives too clean feels like another trap. He waited for the next extinction reel, the next verdict, the next graph that would turn breath into guilt, and when it did not come, he felt his chest loosen in a way that almost hurt. Outside his office, analysts cried without hiding it, not because they were weak, but because the pressure had finally moved and their bodies were remembering they were alive. Cross opened the continuance ledger and added an entry that contained no triumph, only a statement. Today, we kept our names. Admiral Lisa Wren stood on a carrier observation deck and watched Cutter Pax return, scarred and small against the spread of stars. Crews were quiet, not from defeat, but from the kind of exhaustion that makes even victory feel heavy. And medics moved through the ranks with practiced gentleness, checking pulses and eyes as if morale were a wound you could finally dress. Wren spoke to them without ceremony, and her voice carried across the deck like a hand on a shoulder. "They tried to end us by convincing us the story was over," she said, and she let the pause hold. "And we answered by refusing to stop writing. The moral cost remained, because it always does, and Cross refused to hide it behind victory music. The directorate logged every life lost to despair, every station that went dark because someone believed the curve more than the people beside them, and every leader who nearly surrendered because they thought it would reduce suffering." Then the ledger recorded what came next. Rebuilt scrubbers at Palace, fresh convoys in the Spur, and 1,000 hearth beacons still broadcasting names and tasks into the dark. Not because the enemy was listening, but because humans were. The lesson was not that humans were invulnerable. It was that humans could be damaged without being defined by the damage. Weeks later, an intercepted Concord Council fragment reached the archive, degraded and incomplete. It spoke of an unmodeled species, of resistance that increases under loss, and of a dangerous contagion called continuance, and the tone was not hatred but bewilderment. The Concord did not admit defeat, because it did not speak that language, yet it changed its vectors away from human space and never attempted another full morale collapse campaign. In the archives of other civilizations, new entries appeared beside the old extinction reels. A species that fought despair with story and made hope into infrastructure and could not be finished. Cross closed the archive with a final note for whoever listened in the future after the names had faded and the stars had shifted. "Humanity does not win because it cannot fall," he wrote. "Humanity wins because even when it falls, it stands up and decides what it means." The file sealed with a quiet click, and the network kept humming, carrying work, grief, laughter, and tomorrow, all at once, into a universe that had tried and failed to teach humans how to break. Please do press that like button if you have enjoyed this story, and also please do subscribe and hit the bell icon to listen to more stories like this one. That would mean a real lot to me. Now go ahead and listen to your next story here.